we will continue now to zoom in on the choices we make about the energy we use, the ways we travel, the food we eat, and what we consume. And to moderate this second last panel, we have Jason Channell. Please come up here. Jason Channell is Managing Director, Global Head of Sustainable Finance at Citi Global Insights. We will also welcome here to the stage Camilla Sylvest, EVP of Novo Nordisk. Mxolisi Kaunda is Mayor of Durban. Also welcome up here to you. And Raymond Johansen, Governing Mayor of Oslo, and Ted Wheeler, Mayor of Portland. All of you, welcome to the stage.
So thank you to all of our esteemed panelists today for joining us here. So we've just heard about some of the urban action taking place in a key consumption sector, which is obviously food. Now, consumption, we'll all be well aware, covers a very wide range of other areas, from clothing to aviation to manufacturing vehicles, and not least the large embedded emissions which come from construction. Now, construction of buildings and infrastructure is the next biggest source after food. And that, of course, with the challenges we're facing, that's only going to grow as cities grow and as urbanization continues around the world. So the first question I have is for Mayor Johansen, is for you, is see, Oslo has many climate accolades under its belt, which you should be suitably proud of. But next is taking a leading action on reducing these emissions from construction. So can you just tell us, what the city government is actually doing to lead this issue, not just in your own city, but across the whole of the C40?
Thank you. We are quite ambitious, because within 2030 we will be zero emission from Oslo, and it's really a tremendous challenge for us. And we have, since 4 years back, we have introduced a climate budget, which is very, very important. It's an important tool for us, that we in detail can show how and where to reduce the emission. And I think in the future, to fulfill the green shift, it's important to discuss how to govern it. And the devil is in all the details, and that we will clearly show through the climate budget. But Oslo has little industrial activity. We will grow with about 10,000 each year. So we have launched an initiative here within C40 on fossil-free construction sites. And it's together with the other Scandinavian country. And we want then to use our purchasing power, innovative procurement, to ask for fossil-free construction sites. And already we have 9 of them in Oslo. We know we will grow, the city will grow, and we want more cities to be a part of this initiative with fossil-free construction sites. And I think the emission from the construction sites will be one of the most important emitters in the years to come. So that's an important part why we are here to launch this initiative.
So, the challenges that face cities around the world obviously vary enormously from different parts of the world, and we very much know that kind of high-income cities in Europe, North America, Oceania, they consume the most, and clearly they've got to most rapidly curb their consumption emissions if we're really going to avoid the sort of the worst effects of climate change. But at the same time, we've got cities in emerging economies which need to adapt to sustainable consumption patterns as they're growing, and clearly they're growing much faster. So a question for you, Mayor Kaunda, is you're at the helm of a very rapidly growing economy and population. So how do you balance that need to encourage economic growth and create jobs in Durban, but with the need to keep emissions and from consumption in check, and clearly there are many challenges associated with that, and it'd be lovely to hear about how you're dealing with those challenges, opportunities, and the successes that you've had in building a sustainable city.
Thank you very much for having us in this evening, and we greet all the participants. As a Ethekwini municipality, we have heeded on the call for action because we have recently adopted our own climate action plan, which is the first one in Africa, and we are more than ready to continue with that. Our spatial development plan and framework also emphasizes on and ensuring that we encourage more of investment in the city that will be able to take care on investment. And we are also concentrating on the issues of environment, which need all investors to be adhering to the laws of the country and the city to ascertain that when we develop our city, all those issues on climate change are also taken care of. We are also having packages that includes whenever there's a new development in the city, we also encourage investors to build green buildings, and we give them incentives for that. So that also assists us in terms of adhering to the action for call that we must build a sustainable development. We also have clear legislative frameworks which intends to protect the environment, especially natural resources in our city like water and other ecological assets of value that we have in the city by ensuring that whenever we approve development applications, that is also taken into cognizance moving forward. We also decided to design what we call the Durban Metropolitan Open Space System, which therefore assists us in managing our open public spaces and places to ascertain that whatever development that takes place in those areas really adhere to what we have set as objectives to conserve and preserve our environment in the city. So moving forward as a city, we ascertain that we'll be working with all partners, social partners, businesses to ensure that they do work with us in creating this environment, especially moving towards the climate resilience as well as carbon neutrality in the city.
Fantastic. So I want to jump over to Mayor Wheeler from Portland now. So Portland's got a long history as a leader on climate action, and you know, even in some of the world's most prosperous cities, the challenge of ensuring that everybody has enough is still with us. And how can consumption actions such as, you know, circular economy-based actions and policies related to that, how can that be used to tackle inequality in the city and in other cities like Portland?
Yeah, so that's a great question. You know, first of all, we want to be an innovative test bed in Portland in terms of the circular economy, just the way that we see Copenhagen or Amsterdam or Rotterdam being innovative examples of leadership here in Europe. And for us, it started in 2015. We did what was called a consumption-based emissions inventory. Long story short, we looked at all of the goods and all of the services that were consumed in our economy, and we determined how much they were contributing to global climate change. And what we found was that goods and services that were produced somewhere else actually contributed twice as much carbon emissions as things that were produced locally. So that made the case for us that we needed a local circular economy. And as you rightly point out, if people were here for Kate Rayworth's presentation this morning, she talked about the donut. And in the middle of the donut hole, are people who actually need to consume more. So in our economy, we think of the homeless population. They need to consume more housing. They need to consume more food. They need to consume more medicine. On the outside of the donut, you have high worth individuals who frankly are consuming too much. So from our perspective, the way we lift people out of poverty and get them to that ideal sustainable consumption level is we invest in local leadership that's already taking place. For example, we have sharing libraries that are already thriving in our community. You can borrow gardening tools, you can borrow electronic equipment, you can borrow kitchen equipment. I mean, how many blenders do people really need? You can share those kinds of things. And we have repair cafes. So rather than throwing things into the landfill, we have cafes where people can go to repair clothing, repair electronics and other items. And that gives people with lower income a chance to actually reuse those goods that have been refurbished. And last but not least, we have other leaders in our community that can also help lift people out of the center of that donut. Think, for example, what we could do if we invested in organizations that spent time training people on internet tools and new technologies, people who don't have access to those kinds of technologies, and then give them refurbished products that are as good as new, and train them not only to use those products, but create new jobs for that population to help in the refurbishment of additional items. We do that through a local organization in Portland called Free Geek. And last but not least, we don't just like to demolish buildings. What happens when you demolish a building with all this construction? It goes right to the landfill, and that's terrible for the environment. And so what we do instead is we pair a deconstruction ordinance with our local rebuilding center that then takes those deconstructed parts, and architects and builders and ordinary citizens can go to the rebuilding center and reuse those pieces of building that historically had gone to the landfill. So it's about acknowledging that some people need more consumption, some need less, and there's things that we can do in government to actually support the transition of goods away from the landfill and back into the reuse economy.
So a great example there of everybody working together, and obviously, you know, C40's consumption research, which I hope everybody's aware of, you know, that says, you know, as we know, that action is needed from all parties, and we all know from the SDGs as well in terms of, you know, partnership for the goal. You know, mayors, national governments, businesses, individual consumers, we've all got to work together to decarbonize global supply chains, you know, and just shift generally to more sustainable consumption patterns. So I want to change tack slightly now and turn to Camilla. What role, and it's obviously something I have very strong views on myself about, but what role does the global business community play in addressing consumption emissions, and in particular, what's Novo Nordisk do?
Yeah, so Novo Nordisk is a global healthcare company, and we drive change to defeat diabetes. We produce half of the world's insulin. So 5 years ago, in 2015, we set ourselves the target to make sure that all of our production in all countries should run on renewable energy. And at that point in time, we didn't know exactly how to solve that. So in the beginning, we would buy solar power, but also wind power. And in the beginning, it was also more expensive. But over time, we have made sure that most of our factories have now been transformed into renewable energy. And as of the first quarter of next year, all of our factories around the world will be running on renewable energy. So that means that we have reached that ambition, but we are not done yet, because actually production is just, you know, a little bit more than a third of our CO2 or carbon footprint. So now we've set ourselves a new target that by 2030, we want to make sure that all our operations and transport will be carbon neutral. And that means that we have to find ways to eliminate carbon emissions from all of our company cars around the world, but also from our travel and operations in general. And that, again, yet we are not sure exactly how we are going to get there, but we have good experiences with setting these targets forward. And it also helps us that the Danish government has set forward a target to say we want to reduce carbon emissions with 70%, and also the city of Copenhagen, but also many other cities like what we just heard. When they have ambitious targets, we also put targets forward. Then we create business in sustainability, and with that, many of our suppliers can also be sure that if they can deliver green energy to us, or if they can deliver bioplastic, or if they can deliver other types of materials to us that is renewable or recyclable, then there is an opportunity for business. And so for us, business and sustainability goes hand in hand this way.
And is there anything that particularly sort of pertains to cities in terms of what you do and the impact that you can have within an urban environment?
Yeah, so we have also initiated a collaboration with At the moment, it's 22 cities. It's called Cities Changing Diabetes, and many of these cities are represented here, like Rome, like Beijing, and Copenhagen also. So these 22 cities, with them we work on how can we create more healthy cities, but we also find that many of the climate problems and many of the health problems have the same root cause. So together with C40, we also have the opportunity to work together and find out what's the best way to eliminate some of these climate problems and health problems at the same time. An example can just be if we can find ways to make sure that more people would bike, like we see here in Copenhagen, we are actually able to not only reduce carbon emissions, but we are also able to reduce the prevalence of diabetes and obesity, serious chronic diseases that imposes great health problems to societies and people, but also just in terms of financial problems. So these are ways that climate problem and health problems can be tackled together in this Cities Changing Diabetes network. And we are hoping to have many more cities join this network also in the future.
Fantastic. So I want to come back to our three mayors now and have a general question that I want to throw out to everybody. One of the things that staggers me when I look at this, and it was so interesting hearing so many different things that you're tackling, right? There's 1,000,001 things that you could tackle, right? And there's 17 Sustainable Development Goals and 169 sub-targets and that. How on earth do you choose between where to go? It's like, how do you prioritize between things?
Well, I see we are very different cities and coming from different countries. I think Oslo and Norway. Norway is an oil and gas producing country. Oslo, it's small and big at the same time and quite rich. I see we can be a kind of a test bed where we can try things and then maybe, if it's relevant, we can export it. Like the climate budget, which I think it's relevant. The fossil-free construction sites, which is relevant for more of us. We will, by 2050, another 2.5 billion people will live in cities. And we have to build more than 1 billion new houses within 2025. So, of course, it's extremely relevant. And we can do that. And we have now the last month in Oslo, 70% of all the new cars sold were electric vehicles. That was because of a cooperation between the state and the municipality. Maybe it fits some other countries, some other cities to do the same thing. I don't know, but we can try. We have a model, we can try to be a test bed. And we watch other cities, like Portland. It was very interesting to listen to what you can offer, because the countries, they are dragging their feet, not doing anything of relevance, really, if we are honest. So it's a city themselves. That. Thank you. So we are close to the inhabitants. We can try out different models. We can push the government, and we can learn from each other. So it's some positive cherry picking from each other. It's a way forward.
Therefore, a perfect example of how important C40 is in terms of sharing those things. Any other observations? Yes, Kaunda.
Thank you very much. We are, of course, not immune from the challenges that are presented by climate change. Recently, we have experienced floods in our city, which robbed us of 80 lives in the city, and people were displaced. So as a result of that, most of the people are residing in flood areas. So therefore, we have a clear strategy to intervene in building houses so that we relocate them from the dangerous zones where they are located. And part of that, which is also a challenge, is the illegal and also unauthorized developments. So we identified it as a threat to the development and the sustainability of our own economic growth as a city. So therefore, we have to intervene in that regard. But we have started many programs. Part of those programs is our inner city regeneration program, where we are developing the city, and we are also availing a space, especially for purposes of social houses, since you'll know that South Africa had many laws which were unjust. Part of those laws were we're really relocating people from the cities and put them at the periphery of the city. So therefore, for us to entrench social cohesion, we are bringing people inside the city and integrate our communities, those who are rich and those who are poor, because that's a stance that we believe is going to make South Africa move forward. And part of what we are also implementing are our own catalytic projects that we are pushing and we are planning as a city. That also include our special economic zone, the Durban Trade Port in King Shaka Airport. Most of you here, when you visit us in the 10-year period, you'll see a total different city of eThekwini, where you'll see a smart city at this airport, which integrates many economic activities and also incorporate regional economic developments so that those who are remaining in townships and in deep rural areas, they are also incorporated on economic activities of the city. And we are also dealing with the projects on the reforestation, where we have started the plan. That plan is moving with the speed. We are planting trees because the intention is to make sure that we deal with the carbon issues and they are able to sink in those particular trees that we are planting. And we are also moving with the speed to ascertain that the implementation of Sihlanzimvelo, which means that we are taking care of our environment, which is a C40 funded project, which is moving very well, that we intensify that program, and we also expand it to the entire municipality moving forward. So those are the strides that we are putting in place. But of course, we are remaining with a very big challenge of ensuring that we now move with the speed on the radical socio-economic transformation so that we are able to distribute the resources of the city to all citizens of our city in eThekwini.
Okay, so we have...
And if I could just put in a plug for the community. You know, we prioritize, we certainly have our ideas about what should go next and how we do it and what we want our staffs to work on. But the reality is the community also tells us what the community wants prioritized. And in my community, what I heard loudly and clearly was people wanted frontline communities that had been most impacted by carbon emissions to be at the head of the table. So communities of color, women, lower income individuals, and they came to us with our local Green New Deal. And in a nutshell, what it is it was a coalition of communities of color, labor unions, and environmental groups. And they went to the ballot with an initiative that would fund things like energy retrofits, renewable energy, job training, apprenticeships that would engage those particular frontline communities and have them be the first to benefit from this new fund. And the fund is about $50 to $70 million a year for all of those various purposes. And so what we're seeing now is that we can actually achieve our just transition goals as a result of this really impressive local Green New Deal that came to us from the community. And I believe it's the first of its kind in the United States, and my prediction is you're going to see this kind of thing happening all over the world.
So I want to come back to Camilla, if I may, and one of the things that we often see in the business community is the shorter term pressure on business to do things versus kind of doing the right thing with a longer term benefit. And I think there's elements of that we've heard about today, right? There's some pretty easy, popular stuff we could do, but often the stuff that is better and has most impact. How do you deal with that in terms of a strategy and communicating that and making sure that that happens?
Well, we very strongly believe in that we don't have a sustainable business if we don't incorporate our environmental approach into our business and also our social responsibility. Just to give you an example, we are producing insulin, and it comes in quite often in plastic pens, and it means that those pens, we probably produce 12 billion plastic pens over the next 10 years. So of course we realize that if we don't find a way to make those plastic pens either recyclable, made out of a different type of plastic, we will be imposing a big environmental problem. Right now we are working on how do we make sure that they will be recyclable. And so to do that, we of course could work completely in isolation and make sure that we would have small boxes in every big city for Novo Nordisk pens. But that, of course, does not work for the mayors, that every company would do that. So we need to work with the mayors, but also with our competitors, and maybe even other types of businesses, to find ways to make sure that we can recycle that type of plastic that is often combined with bio-based material as well. So this is a way that we try to look, 5-10 years ahead in terms of what's the biggest impact that we are going to have on the environment and how can we solve that. So we started with production, then we move into operations and transport, but the problem with the plastic pens, or the challenge there, is something we're working very hard on now to make sure that we can solve. Not tomorrow and not next year, but very soon thereafter, we need to test out solutions. And that's where a city network in our experience, means that the regulatory environment in the cities is easier to work with than states necessarily. So we will start some of our pilots in cities to make sure that we get operating fast.
So it's getting ahead of the curve and driving the change rather than being forced. Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. So we've got about 1 minute left. So I want to move to the quick-fire round of questions, which is challenges and changes. So for each of you, and you've obviously got about 15 seconds each, what's the biggest challenge you've got? And if you could change one thing to boost us to move towards a more sustainable circular economy, what would you do? I'm going to start with Mayor Wheeler at the other end.
Help local businesses to thrive in a zero carbon emissions economy. And that means giving them clean energy, that means giving them a clean supply chain, and that means helping them to develop the workforce to be successful in that new environment.
Fantastic.
Build bridges between the social classes and generation, and not let the environmental issue be a middle class issue, but an issue for everyone.
We believe in partnerships and collaborations, so therefore we'll be intensifying our mobilization of all sectors, the business sector, to adhere to our call to save our environment. And moving forward, we have also developed an integrated rapid public transport networks, which then integrate these transportation systems in the city, provision of effective and efficient public transport systems so that people really are served in a manner that it's envisaged. But the major challenge is on job creation. Hence, we have a clear strategy to create jobs, especially sustainable jobs for our communities.
Fantastic. Last but not least, Camilla.
Yeah, we have a clear defined ambition that's called Circular for Zero, to make sure that one day we will have zero environmental impact from our company. And we're starting with the carbon emission and the plastic. And we sincerely appreciate that we can work in collaboration with cities, but also with governments to achieve this, because we cannot do it alone, but we hope we can be an inspiration for others.
Fantastic. Well, I'd like you to join me in thanking the panelists here today, Camilla, Mayor Kaunda, Mayor Johansen, and Mayor Wheeler. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.